In May 1940, Nazi Germany launches its offensive in the West. The Allied forces of France, Britain, Belgium, and the Netherlands possess greater numbers of men, guns, and tanks than the Germans, and the French army is regarded as the finest in the world. Yet within just 6 weeks, Germany delivers a stunning blow, defeating the Allies with breathtaking speed. How did this happen so decisively, so fast? When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Britain and France declared war. But the Western Allies did little as German and Soviet troops crushed Poland, while Chancellor Adolf Hitler was already preparing his next strike. He felt pressed for time. His uneasy pact with the Soviet Union might not last, and the Allies were still unprepared for a large-scale conflict. On September 27th, he informed the High Command of his plan to attack France within a month. Nearly every German general, including Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb, was shocked. The French will not be taken by surprise. They know perfectly well that if Germany attacks, it must come through Belgium. They will be alert. Our blood cost will be enormous. An assault on France cannot be carried out as it was in Poland. It will be long and costly. Lieb 184. Ignoring his general's concerns, Hitler ordered plans for an offensive through neutral Belgium and the Netherlands, with the goal of capturing northern France to gain a position from which to strike Britain. The start date was set for November 25th. Chief of the Army General Staff, Franz Halder, drafted a cautious plan focused on a main thrust through central Belgium. But Hitler was unimpressed. This is merely the old Schlieffen plan again? With a heavy right wing along the coast, one cannot succeed with such a strategy twice. Görlitz, S-226. For months, debate raged between Hitler and his generals, causing 29 postponements of the offensive. Gradually, Hitler became convinced that Germany's limited armored and motorized forces should be concentrated for a daring strike. Through the densely forested Ardennes, a maneuver designed to cut off the Allied armies if they advanced into Belgium as expected. Senior commanders viewed the idea as reckless. Unknown to Hitler, General Erich von Manstein also supported an Ardennes breakthrough, a concept later known as the Sichelschnitt, or sickle cut plan. But his proposal was initially suppressed by the Army High Command. Then, in January 1940, fate intervened when a German Messerschmitt 108 Typhoon carrying sensitive plans crashed in Belgium, forcing yet another revision. On February 24, 1940, the final version was approved, a diluted form of Manstein's idea. Army Group B would engage and fix the Allied armies in the north, while Army Group A would drive through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River at Sedan, and race toward Abbeville, where the Somme meets the sea. It was a bold gamble. German armor would have to move through narrow forest roads, their flanks exposed and vulnerable for miles. General Fedor von Bock, commanding Army Group B, warned Halder of the danger. You intend to advance within 10 miles of the Maginot Line, with your flank exposed, and expect the French to sit idle. You are squeezing your tanks into the cramped roads of the Ardennes as if air power didn't exist. And then you hope to push to the coast with a 200-mile open flank, exactly where the bulk of the French army stands. Freezer, The War in the West, 1939-1940, page 297. Meanwhile, the French and British were also making their plans, complicated by diplomatic constraints. Convinced of the Maginot Line's impregnability, they assumed the Germans would attack through neutral Belgium and the Netherlands. However, both nations resisted detailed coordination with Franco-British forces, fearing to provoke Germany. Nevertheless, this remained the core of the Allies' Plan D. The best French divisions and the British Expeditionary Force would advance into Belgium if Germany attacked, establishing defenses along the Dyle River, the Albert Canal, and at strong points like Fort Eben-Emael. Yet Plan D carried risks. The Allies would forfeit initiative, moving into the path of a German offensive. The Ardennes sector, deemed impassable for large armored forces, was left dangerously underdefended. Intelligence reports warning of German buildup in the region were ignored. There was also no strategic reserve. The 7th French Army was ordered north into the Netherlands, politically appealing but militarily dubious. On the eve of battle, Germany fielded 2.8 million men, 7,500 guns, 4,000 aircraft, and 2,700 tanks and self-propelled guns on the Western Front. Only 16 of its 157 divisions were motorized. The Allies, including neutral Dutch and Belgian forces, deployed 3.7 million men, 14,000 guns, 3,000 aircraft, and 3,700 tanks. Thus, while Germany prepared its audacious Sichelschnitt, the Allies planned an uncertain thrust into the Low Countries. On May 10, 1940, Germany unleashed Case Yellow, a campaign that would astonish the world. And even the Germans themselves. German troops surged across the borders of Belgium and the Netherlands. To suggest their main effort lay in the north, they sent soldiers disguised in Dutch uniforms to seize key bridges by surprise. German airborne assaults on Dutch airfields largely failed thanks to stiff resistance, yet the Netherlands could not hold out. On May 14th, the Luftwaffe bombed Rotterdam to compel surrender, killing around 800 civilians, though early reports exaggerated the toll to 30,000, and reducing parts of the city to rubble. The Dutch government fled, and the army capitulated on May 15th. Belgian forces also retreated rapidly, though some units that missed the withdrawal order delayed German tanks for several hours, a crucial detail Allied leaders overlooked amid confusion. When French and British troops finally advanced that evening, they were slowed by massive refugee columns clogging the roads. The Belgians placed hope in Fort Eben-Emael, but despite fierce resistance, German glider and paratroop forces captured it on May 11th, farther south. In the vital Ardennes sector, the German advance faced serious obstacles. The panzers were hindered by destroyed bridges and roadblocks, creating traffic jams stretching nearly 250 kilometers behind the lines. Only now did the French command grasp the scale of the offensive there. Local officers had already requested reinforcements, but none had arrived. In response, Commander-in-Chief Maurice Gamelin dispatched 3 divisions. Some Allied officers feared their armies were walking into a trap in Belgium, yet Gamelin believed German artillery, though still horse-drawn, would take 9 days to reach the Meuse River, leaving no time for major adjustments. On May 12th, as a tank battle raged at Hanot, where 630 German tanks defeated a French force of 470, German units farther south reached the Meuse. General Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division and Heinz, Guderian's 99th Corps were leading the charge. Corps under Rommel and Guderian both prepared to cross. In a troubling sign, French forces opposite Guderian withdraw without resistance. Many German tanks are light Panzer Y, 2, and 38 8T models, yet they arrive in overwhelming numbers and with complete surprise. Oberstleutnant Hermann Balck observes the mood of captured French soldiers. The French are performing worse than poorly. When asked why they are fighting us, they reply, because England and the rich want war. We are not waging war. War is being waged upon us. Their eyes burn with hatred when they speak of England. The French were never like this before. Tagebuch Balck. On May 13th, German infantry and reconnaissance units crossed the Meuse at Dinant and Sedan. The French struggle to comprehend the pace of the advance. As one captured general admits, "You are much too fast, far too fast for us." That is everything. Freezer 278. Even before the crossings are complete, rumors ripple through French lines that German troops have already broken through behind them, prompting panic and disorderly retreats. Germany's success stems not only from its armored spearhead through the Ardennes, but also from relentless air support. The Luftwaffe strikes constantly at Allied columns despite suffering heavy losses of its own. Dive bombers like the Ju-87 Stuka pulverize French positions along the Meuse ahead of the ground assault. On May 14th, German tanks finally cross the river, but at a steep cost. Some panzer units are reduced to a quarter of their strength, short on ammunition and fuel. The French prepare counterattacks to crush the fragile bridgeheads. Failure will leave half the Allied army, including its best mechanized divisions, cut off in the north. The gravity of the crisis reaches both London and Paris. On May 10th, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain resigns, replaced by Winston Churchill. A few days later, French Premier Paul Reynaud recalls General Maxime Weygand from Syria to assume command of the army and appoints Charles de Gaulle Deputy Minister of Defense. Yet Reynaud also brings in the aged World War I hero Philippe Pétain as Deputy Premier, though Pétain believes the war is already lost and blames Britain for provoking it. In desperation, Reynaud pleads for 10 additional British fighter squadrons to be sent to France. Churchill wishes to comply, but the cabinet, fearing for home defense, agrees to only 4. Confidence in the French army wanes, especially when General Gamelin admits he has no strategic reserve. On May 15th, German forces expand their bridgeheads, pushing up to 65 kilometers by nightfall. Gamelin finally recognizes the magnitude of the danger and orders Allied troops in Belgium to withdraw. General von Bock wishes to press his advantage with Army Group B, but the German High Command fears this could jeopardize the sickle-cut plan. Both army groups pause for 3 days to ensure the Northern Allied forces remain trapped in the forming pocket and to allow infantry to catch up and secure the flanks against potential French counterblows, a risk Manstein's original plan had foreseen. The Allies, however, failed to exploit the lull. When a French general confesses he has no strategy against the panzers, British General Henry Pownall snaps in frustration. "My God! How dreadful to be allied with such a temperamental people." Jackson, 86. Yet the engagement at Stonne demonstrates the potential of French armor and explains German caution. Captain Pierre Belot, commanding a Char B-1 bis, destroys 11 Panzer IIIs, 2 Panzer IVs, and 2 anti-tank guns in one of the war's most extraordinary single-tank actions. Despite his heroism and the brief delay, on May 20th, the 2nd Panzer Division reaches the Channel at Abbeville. Many French troops are caught completely off guard or paralyzed by constant air attacks. Lieutenant Alexander Stahlberg later recalls the scene. The streets were lined with the wreckage of a defeated French army, shattered vehicles, burned-out tanks, abandoned guns, an endless trail of destruction. Beaver 114. Over 1 million British and French troops now find themselves trapped north of the Somme. While the Royal Air Force has lost a quarter of its strength, the Allies scramble to organize a double counterattack to strike at the German flanks, but confusion reigns over who commands the encircled forces, and the Germans continue to advance with stunning speed. Nevertheless, Anglo-French troops managed to launch a powerful counterattack near Arras on May 21st and 22, including Matilda tanks spearhead the attack. But despite their superior armor, the overstretched German forces managed to hold the line. With the situation deteriorating, the Allies begin a desperate fighting withdrawal toward Dunkirk, where the British plan an evacuation, an act that many French commanders view as abandonment. Concerned about potential counterattacks from the south, Field Marshal von Rundstedt requests a halt to the advance, and on May 24th, Hitler agrees. This controversial pause later becomes one of the most debated decisions of the war. In the aftermath, Hitler attempts to claim that his motive was to spare Britain humiliation in hopes of peace talks. In truth, von Rundstedt himself issued the stop order but falsely attributed it to Hitler to ensure obedience. His reasoning was tactical. He wanted to prepare his tanks for a possible Allied strike from Dunkirk, give infantry time to reach the Somme line, and avoid unsuitable terrain for armor. Panzer Commander von Kleist also deemed the Dunkirk area unfit for tanks. The High Command, including Hitler and the Navy, believed the evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, to be impossible, making the use of precious armored units unnecessary, especially since the Germans had already lost around 600 tanks. They expected the Luftwaffe and artillery to crush the trapped Allies before ground troops moved in to finish the job. But the pause wasn't the only reason the BEF survived. On May 25th, British troops captured a German staff car containing vital plans for upcoming attacks. General Lord Gort used the intelligence to reinforce threatened positions, preventing German forces from cutting off the main British line of retreat, an action that arguably saved the BEF Operation Dynamo. The evacuation from Dunkirk began on May 26th, followed by a BBC appeal for civilian boats. Chaos ruled the beaches and ships as German aircraft relentlessly bombed the stranded troops. Quartermaster Frank Hurrell recalls, "I got on a boat just after 7 that evening. During loading, an air raid struck. The ship was hit, and I was blown into the water. There were about 30 of us. I could only dog paddle with my wounded leg, but I kept afloat and made it back to the beach to wait for another chance." British and French rearguards fought desperately to buy time, and by June 4th, the final defenders were evacuated. In total, some 700 British and 160 French vessels managed to rescue about 193,000 British and 145,000 French soldiers. Another 88,000, mostly French, surrendered to protect the evacuation routes. German aircraft sank 20 Allied warships and damaged dozens more. The operation's success was extraordinary, especially given the Belgian army's sudden surrender on May 28th without warning its allies. King Leopold's decision to capitulate and become a German prisoner enraged the Allies. French Premier Paul Reynaud called him a pig, and former British Prime Minister David Lloyd George denounced the act as a sample of perfidy and cowardice, the collapse of the front-strained relations in both London and Paris. Generals Weygand and Pétain urged Reynaud to seek peace with Germany, but he refused. In Britain, Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax suggested negotiations via Mussolini's Italy, but Churchill rejected the idea outright. "Even if we are defeated, we shall be no worse off than if we stop fighting now. We must not be dragged into the abyss with France." With the BEF and the best French divisions either captured or stripped of heavy weapons, the Germans shifted focus to the remaining French army. South of Dunkirk, the front stretched along the Somme and Aisne rivers. German bridgeheads at Abbeville threatened supply routes to the ports the 2nd BEF still relied upon. Churchill, hoping to show solidarity, sent 300,000 fresh British troops to France. General Alan Brooke was unimpressed. "It's impossible to give a corpse any feeling, and the French army is dead." Yet France was not finished. On May 27th, the French 7th Army launched a counterattack on the Abbeville bridgehead, with Charles de Gaulle's division and Manstein's corps among the combatants. French B-1 bis tanks caused panic among some German units, but the Germans deployed their deadly 88mm anti-aircraft guns in a ground roll, smashing the uncoordinated Allied assaults and preserving the bridgehead. On June 5th, the Germans began Case Red, the final offensive to conquer France. Their plan aimed to cross the Somme and Aisne rivers and drive rapidly south before the French could regroup. Army Group B was to advance toward the Seine, Oise, and Aisne. Then Groups A and B would deliver the main strike east of Paris toward Troyes and Saint-Dizier. Finally, Army Group C would breach the Maginot Line at Saarbrücken and push across the Rhine at Colmar. The Germans now fielded twice as many divisions as the Allies. General Weygand ordered his troops to defend their positions to the last man, declaring that France's fate depended on this battle. He also introduced a new defensive tactic, the hérisson, or hedgehog, a fortified village or forest strongpoint designed for all-round defense. These positions would delay German infantry while French armor struck at enemy tanks that broke through. Initially, the strategy worked. Luftwaffe Commander General von Richthofen wrote, "What looked this morning like success turned into nothing. The French are hard and tough. They've fortified every village. Our tanks drive through, but when our infantry follows, the French rise up and attack. The infantry can't cover the tanks, so the tanks move on alone. Everything bogs down." On June 5th and 6th, savage battles raged south of the Somme. Many French troops fought to the death, obeying Weygand's orders. German forces also committed atrocities, murdering surrendered French African colonial troops and civilians in massacres at places like Vinct and Oignies. Across the campaign, at least 3,000 colonial soldiers and nearly 200 Allied prisoners were executed. One German officer justified the killings by saying, "An inferior race does not deserve to fight against so civilized a race as the Germans." On June 6th, the Germans broke through at the Chemin des Dames and forced crossings over the Aisne and Somme. French units along the Somme estuary retreated to the Bréla River, but once again the German panzers advanced too quickly, outflanking new defensive lines by nightfall. On June 7th, General Hoth's armored divisions reached Forges-les-Eaux, splitting the French 10th Army in two. Though his superiors feared overextension, Hoth pushed toward the Seine. Meanwhile, Rommel's 7th Division raced ahead without orders, another example of the aggressive improvisation that defined the German campaign. The French managed to demolish the bridges at Rouen in time, but Hoth's breakthrough forced a general withdrawal, shattering morale. German reports noted that even French armored units avoided combat. The regiment encountered several enemy tanks which retreated as soon as we opened fire. Some crews even abandoned their vehicles without fighting. On June 9th, the second phase of Case Red began, and though many French soldiers fought with bravery and discipline, holding firm with effective artillery and well-organized defenses, the outcome was already sealed. Parts of the French army are disintegrating into chaos. A French staff officer describes the scene. A stunned and haggard herd, a jumble of units, regiments, and services. It's not really about morale. They're confused, lost, unsure of what's happening. The mere sight of an airplane terrifies them. Krembril 294. Soon, German breakthroughs occur everywhere. Guderian's panzers surge south from the Aisne into the French rear. Manstein's infantry cross the Seine, and the 9th Army reaches the Marne, crossing it the next day. The British conclude the situation is hopeless and withdraw the 200,000 men of the 2nd BEF. Weygand declares the war lost and urges peace, but Reynaud insists on resistance. You mistake Hitler for Wilhelm I, the old man who merely took Alsace-Lorraine. But Hitler is Genghis Khan. Jackson 103. On June 14th, German troops enter Paris, the same day the final phases of the offensive begin. Verdun, once the symbol of unbreakable French resolve, falls on June 16th. The Germans push to the Loire and reach the Swiss border. The French army is shattered. Politically, the situation collapses as well. Italy declares war on June 10th, Norway surrenders, and by June 16th, most French ministers demand an armistice. Marshal Pétain threatens to resign if Reynaud refuses, a fatal blow to the government's unity. Reynaud appeals to President Roosevelt for aid but receives only sympathy. London proposes a Franco-British union to continue the fight. But Pétain suspects a British ploy to seize French colonies, calling it a marriage to a corpse. Fearing social unrest, he insists on peace to prevent a communist uprising. Reynaud resigns, Pétain becomes premier, and the next day France requests an armistice. Not all Frenchmen give up. In London, Charles de Gaulle broadcasts an appeal urging his compatriots to continue fighting. Few hear him that day, but his words will echo through history. While negotiations for the armistice proceed, Mussolini seeks his own share of glory. On June 21st, 22 Italian divisions attack in the Alps, but 6 French divisions hold firm. To save Italian pride, German forces join the assault from behind, triggering fierce mountain battles on June 23 to 24. Finally, on June 25, 1940, the armistice takes effect. The Battle of France lasts 46 days and costs the lives of 2,900 Dutch, 7,500 Belgian, 12,500 British, 59,000 French, 45,000 German, and 150 Italian soldiers. Around 30,000 civilians die, and 8 million flee their homes. Over 2 million French and Belgian soldiers become prisoners. The material losses mirror the scale of defeat. Germany loses 1,800 aircraft, while the Allies lose 3,020. 839 German tanks are destroyed compared to 3,300 Allied ones. Debates over the reasons for France's collapse erupt almost immediately. Gamelin blames cowardly soldiers. De Gaulle argues the army was misused. Pétain claims France was spiritually weak, while historian and resistance fighter Marc Bloch points to the failures of the High Command. Ultimately, the Allies fell in the field because they could not match the speed and concentration of German armor, underestimated tactical air power, failed to coordinate counteractions, and suffered from disunity and fading morale. Germany's swift victory shocks the world, including the neutral United States, which begins reconsidering its security posture. Inside Germany, propaganda glorifies the campaign as a triumph of blitzkrieg, the lightning war of tanks, though in reality, much of the fighting was done by infantry. The success breeds overconfidence. Hitler's prestige peaks, dissent vanishes, and German leaders overlook dangerous flaws, like exposed flanks and logistical strain, because they got away with them. France has fallen, but the war continues. Britain and de Gaulle's Free French vow to fight on. Even as France surrenders, Germany prepares for its next campaigns. The skies over Britain fill with bombers, and in Berlin, strategists turn their gaze eastward. Less than 5 years later, the situation will be completely reversed. American, British, and Free French armies will cross the German frontier and advance toward the Rhine, while the Red Army closes in on Berlin. Inside his bunker, Hitler will face the end. If you want to explore those final weeks of World War II, which are often overlooked in traditional documentaries, we've created 2 in-depth series totaling over 8 hours. Rhineland 45, covering the Allied push to the Rhine, and 16 Days in Berlin, a day-by-day chronicle of the war's climactic battle. Both feature expert interviews, detailed maps, and on-location footage. Due to the uncompromising historical depictions, these series aren't available on YouTube, but you can watch them ad-free and in 4K on Nebula, a streaming platform built by independent creators. There, you'll also find exclusive documentaries like The Battle of Britain by Real Engineering. All our content is available early, ad-free, and on any device, browser, smartphone, or smart TV. Visit Nebula.tv Real-Time History to get 40% off an annual subscription, just $30 for a year. Again, that's Nebula.tv Real-Time History. All sources for this episode are listed in the video description. If you're watching on Nebula or Patreon, thank you. Your support makes our work possible. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this has been a production of Real-Time History, the only history channel that is not a sample of perfidy and poltroonery.